Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Father-Son Packers podcast, your source for Packers news, notes, and analysis. My name is Tommy, and I'm one of your hosts, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, my dad, Matt. Dad, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. Just still enjoying a victory week for week one. And we're starting off 2 weeks in a row on the road, which is a little odd. And watched Thursday Night Football, which was somewhat entertaining. I mean, it was entertaining if you had no... But all of my fantasy opponents seem to have somebody doing great in that game. So
here's the thing:
though I did have Devontae Smith in one. To
me, it is always entertaining to watch the Vikings lose. So that's a win right there for me.
And I was fairly stress-free about that particular outcome. I didn't think they were going to come back and win.
It got a little close for a second, but it's always good when
I guess I just told myself it's not going to happen again this year.
It's always good when your NFC North competition loses, is moral of the story. But anyways, we are here coming to you on a Thursday night.
It is a material benefit to the Packers when the Vikings lose.
100%. But we are coming here to you live on a Thursday night, and we are here to talk to you a little bit, doing our pregame for the Atlanta Falcons game on Sunday. Packers will be playing in Atlanta. We'll be talking all about that. We'll be doing these pre-games every single week, usually on Thursday nights. And then we'll be doing post-games after the game, usually on Monday nights after we have a little time to let the game settle and really look at it and rewatch it. So we're doing 2 episodes every week now in season, so come check it out. If you like what you hear today, come give us a follow on Twitter at FatherSonPacker. We tweet out when we have new episodes out, articles we find interesting, pieces of Packers news, videos we find interesting, breakdowns, etc., etc. And if you like what you hear here even more today, come subscribe to us on your podcast platform of choice, whether that's Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. We even put all our episodes out on YouTube. If you subscribe to us there, we would really appreciate it because it would really help our numbers. But so those are the pitches. If you've heard us before, you've heard those pitches before, but we're going to keep doing them, and we're just going to keep doing them and doing them and doing them. But like we said, Dad, we're going to be breaking down everything we think we want to keep an eye on for this Falcons game as the Packers try to move to 2-0 and try and hold that lead with first with a tiebreaker for the NFC North. But before we do that, we just wanted to touch on one piece of news, and that is that the Packers have signed guard Michael Jordan to the practice squad, cutting tight end Austin Allen.
Not that one.
Not that one. Not number 20. Not shooting guard Michael Jordan. Offensive guard Michael Jordan. So some addition to the practice squad there. Moving on from Austin Allen, I think just makes me think that they were pretty happy with what they saw out of Sims on Sunday. And it seemed
that's
like
how I took it too. They must have been quite happy with how Sims played, and because I was a little surprised that they when I first saw that Allen was cut, they don't have a tight end on their practice squad. So I mean, it has to mean that they feel good about Sims being their sort of blocking tight end going forward.
Yeah, and I thought Sims played pretty well in the parts that he was noticeable. I don't think he made any egregious errors. He blocked pretty well. Looks pretty good in that 89. But yeah, pretty good day. Pretty good day from Sims. I thought Austin Allen looked pretty good in the preseason, though, so I'm sure he'll catch on somewhere. But that's pretty much the only news and notes for the Packers. But, Dad, let's move on into previewing this game. And let's start with the injury report. So this is Thursday. We don't have the official out, questionable, doubtful, etc. list. But we do have some updates for both the Packers and the Falcons from this injury report. And just to read them off really quick. So we are recording Thursday, like we said, so we only have the updates up to Thursday. But so for the Packers, David Bakhtiari has not practiced yet this week, which is to be expected. Still vet rest for his knee. Romeo Doubs has been limited both Wednesday and Thursday with his hamstring injury, but it's good to see that he hasn't moved backwards. Rashawn Gary has been limited Wednesday and Thursday with his knee, obviously just giving him some time. Elton Jenkins has been limited with a knee injury Wednesday and Thursday, but still a limited participant. Anthony Johnson Jr. has been a full participant both Wednesday and Thursday with a knee injury, presumably the same one that he suffered during preseason practices. Aaron Jones with a hamstring has not practiced Wednesday or Thursday, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a second because that is a bit concerning. Quay Walker has been in the concussion protocol. He did not practice on Wednesday, but he was a limited participant on Thursday, so it sounds like he's at least moving through that protocol.
And that's a good sign that he's progressing.
He has a chance for Sunday to play, but we'll see. It'll all depend on how he looks on Friday and moving into Sunday. Christian Watson has not practiced either Wednesday or Thursday with the same hamstring injury that kept him out last week. And then Daniel Whelan popped up on the injury report today as a full participant, though, with a finger injury. So nothing really to just something to keep an eye on, but nothing that I'm overly concerned about, unless he starts dropping holds, and then we're going to have a problem. But he was a full participant in practice, so nothing too bad. And then on the Falcons side, Troy Anderson, their linebacker, has a concussion and hasn't practiced Wednesday or Thursday. Calais Campbell, their defensive lineman, who they added in free agency, is a really good player. Did not practice on Wednesday, but wasn't on the injury report Thursday, and it looks like that was just vet rest. Jeff Okudah, who they traded for previously, a third overall pick for the Lions for corner, with a foot injury, was a limited participant on both Wednesday and Thursday. Cordero Patterson with a thigh injury, full participant both Wednesday and Thursday. He didn't play in the last game, though, but it is good to see.
And neither did Okudah.
Yes, neither did Okudah. Good
So
note.
they might be getting both of those guys back this week that they didn't have last week.
Yes, and then Jonas Smith, also vet rest, did not participate in practice on Wednesday, but did participate on Thursday. Now, Dad, I think the biggest one to keep an eye on here is Aaron Jones. So with Aaron Jones not practicing today, it doesn't bode well for Sunday. And so this is from Dr. Edwin Porras on Twitter, at FB Injury Doc. So since 2018, there have been 17 qualified running backs who missed 2 days of practice in a row. And of those 17, only 2 ended up playing that week, 11%. So essentially, only a 1 in 10 chance that Aaron Jones ends up suiting up on Sunday. I know he said he wasn't particularly worried about it. I know Matt LaFleur said he's going to give him up till Sunday to play. But that's the one I'm keeping my eye on, because if he doesn't move to at least limited tomorrow, I'm going to be pretty concerned about whether or not he's going to play. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, it would be a lot better if he was able to do something. Though maybe did he have his helmet on for an outside a little bit today? So it was a little bit, even though he's still listed as a DNP, it seemed like he progressed a little bit from Wednesday in terms of being visible outside and doing some stretching. Yeah,
because on Wednesday they said he was, I think the quote was, nowhere to be found on Wednesday. And then on Thursday he was outside with his helmet on. So that's a step.
That's a little step. I mean, we said after the game, it's like, okay, just bubble wrap him until the game. But,
that's true.
But from our perspective, we don't know if that's what they're doing.
Yeah.
From the outside, it's like it could mean that they're just going to give him as much time as possible before the game to rest, and they don't want to do anything, or it could be more than that. We just don't know.
Yeah, and we talked about this in the postgame pod for the Bears pod, but there was such a notable difference in the drives that had Aaron Jones versus the drives that did not have Aaron Jones. All 4 of the drives that had Aaron Jones ended up being scoring drives, 3 of them a touchdown, and 1 of them a field goal. And then the ones that didn't, I mean, we talked about it in the first half of that Bears game. They essentially did 3 straight drives in the middle of that first half where they didn't score any points and just went they had 1 first down, 2 3 and outs, and punted every
3 and outs.
Yeah, so there's a tangible difference when Aaron Jones is out there and when he's not out there. So that's definitely something to be concerned about, I think. But Dad, do you want to move into the meat of this game preview? Anything else you want to know?
Well, I would just say about Christian Watson still not practicing. He was saying that maybe there's a chance that he would play this week, but that was a couple days ago before practices started. So I would say with each day, it gets less likely that he plays this week.
Yeah, I agree. And actually, I realized there was something I wanted to bounce off of you, and something I had actually looked at and I hadn't written down in our planning doc, but I'm going to bounce it off of you. This is just my theory and like my slight fear. I'm not sure David Bakhtiari plays in this game. So he hasn't practiced either of the days, which is not the reason why I don't think he might not play. Don't think he might play. Either way, however you want to say it. Atlanta plays turf. And David Bakhtiari, so let's go back to last year. Last year, the Packers played 1 game on turf. Or David Bakhtiari was active for 1 game that the Packers played on turf, and that was at the Lions in Week 9. And David Bakhtiari had to leave at halftime of that game and did not come back because his knee flared up on him. And so I was on turf. It's the only game he played on turf all year. Fast forward to this past week, obviously Aaron Rodgers' injury, really horrible, happened on the MetLife turf. And if you didn't see it, David Bakhtiari essentially went on a pretty long thread talking about how he thought that this injury would not occur on grass. Now, there's a lot of statistical evidence to back up that injuries, especially like ligament injuries, are more common on artificial grass than on natural grass. That's been well documented. And he has put out a lot of statements. He went on the Rich Eisen show to talk about how the players need to stand up and advocate for more natural grass fields. And the NFLPA, the Players Association, put out a statement about how they want more natural grass fields and to start moving away from artificial grass. And so I think the combination of the fact that his knee flared up on him on artificial turf the last time he played on it, Aaron Rodgers' injury on Monday, and the possibility that the artificial grass had something to do with it, and then the fact that he's made a lot of statements about how he thinks that this artificial grass is a huge problem for players, which, there's definitely an argument there, and you can see the argument that he has there that statistically more injuries happen on it. I wouldn't be surprised if either to protect his knee or to make a statement with regards to how important he thinks moving to natural grass is. I think keeping an eye on his status for this game in particular is something we should do, because I think there is a world in which he does not play on Sunday. What do you think?
I hadn't realized that the only game he played on turf last year was the Lions, where he didn't finish the game. So that's something I hadn't considered. I felt like today, was it today or yesterday, he had walked back a little bit of his rhetoric about the turf in terms of the players making statements like, they're not going to do anything because we say so. The only person who could change it is the fans.
I did see that quote today.
So it makes me think that maybe he's a little less likely to make a statement as a player if he thinks it's the fans that have any power to do anything. But again, the last year thing I hadn't considered. So
yeah, but that was just something that I had thought of the other day, and if he doesn't go, it would probably be Rasheed Walker, left tackle. But it's something. It
looks like it based on what they did in the preseason.
Yeah, but I think it's something to certainly keep an eye on, because the fact that the one time, and even if he does play, maybe he doesn't make it through the whole game. And so I think Rasheed Walker would be someone to keep an eye on either way, even if he does end up starting the game.
What would you put the over under on David Bakhtiari practices for the season?
Oh goodness, for the season?
Does it get into double digits?
No, I would say
that's less than one a week.
I would say eight and a
half.
half. Yeah, would be the
one every 2 weeks.
Yeah, and I'd probably take the under. Because
you just set the line yourself, and I'm going to take the under. That guy's a sucker.
Yeah, I know, right? House always loses. But yeah, no, because just like we've seen it, he played amazing last week, and hadn't practiced in 2.5 weeks. So it's like, okay,
he was having a good old time too when they were leading. Yes. Interacting with the Chicago crowd. Even before
they were leaving, he was flipping off the crowd, which is amazing.
Did
you see the thing that was like
dancing and like posing on the ground he was enjoying himself.
Yeah, I mean, if there's one thing you can say about Bakhtiari, I mean, it always does seem like he's having fun out there. But anyway, Dad,
especially if you see him at a Bucks game or somewhere.
Oh yes, I mean, he's living his life. He's having a great time. But let's move on to the actual preview, the rest of this preview, and our analysis, things we're looking for, et cetera, for this game against the Falcons. And just to set it up, here are a few facts about the game. It will be in Atlanta, 1 o'clock local time on Sunday afternoon. Currently, the Falcons are favored by 2 points with an over-under of 40.5, which is an implied score of about 21-19 Falcons. The line was initially minus 1.5 for the Packers, but has actually just flipped in the last day. Interesting on whether or not that's entirely injury report based with Jones not practicing. That would be my guess, but definitely something to keep an eye on. Assumed to be pretty much a close game and a low scoring game is the main takeaways there. But Dad, let's move into looking into the Falcons and what they've been up to. So if you've ever listened to one of our pregames before, we essentially just talk a lot about the opponent in these ones. Obviously, we'll talk a little bit about Green Bay and how they specifically match up against the Falcons. But the main thing is, we know you know a lot about the Packers. We know you maybe don't know as much about the team they're playing. So we're going to start here with a little brief overview of what's been going on with the Falcons for the past year. So last year, the Falcons went 7-10, which was the 8th worst record in the league. On offense, they had the overall 17th best offense by DVOA. That's from FTN, which is the new home of DVOA. However, very similar to the Bears, actually. 29th ranked in passing. They really struggled to throw with Marcus Mariota at the helm, who last year had, this is according to Austin Gale on Twitter, the 4th highest uncatchable throw percentage from clean pockets since 2017, which is really, really bad. It's down there with like Josh Rosen one year, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. But they were 3rd in rushing by DVOA, and that's their head coach Arthur Smith's bread and butter. Before he was the head coach of the Falcons, he was the offensive coordinator of the Titans with Derrick Henry leading that potent rushing attack. And then they were 5th in adjusted line yards from FTN, which kind of measures essentially how much work the offensive line in particular is doing in the run game. And we'll talk a little bit about their offensive line later when we talk about strengths of the team. In terms of their defense was very bottom of the barrel. As you'll see in this preview, there's a lot of parallels between this team and the Bears. They were overall 31st ranked defense by DVOA, 31st against the pass, 27th against the rush, second to last in adjusted line yards on defense. Only Green Bay was worse, so that's like how much your D-line is getting pushed back in the run game. So not great there.
Yeah, I was going to say, I just wanted to add that was that's a run game line stat.
Yes, and so their line was getting pushed around in the run game a lot last year. Although I think they do have some bodies there that had down years last year and could possibly bounce back this year. However, also, they've made a bunch of additions to the team to try and shore up these issues. So over this offseason, on defense, they brought in safety Jesse Bates from Cincinnati on a massive deal, which has already paid off in Week 1. He had 2 interceptions and a forced fumble against the Carolina Panthers in Week 1 in their win. They also brought in Calais Campbell and David Onyemata to help with their defensive line. And then they traded for Jeff Okudah and signed Mike Hughes, who were 2 former highly drafted first-round corners. Okudah with the 3rd pick, and then Mike Hughes was in the 20s, I think, from the Vikings. So 2 NFC North former corners that I'm sure some Packers fans are very familiar with. But, trying to essentially...
The Hughes isn't starting. Maybe he's hurt. I know Okudah's hurt and didn't start. They also added Trey Flowers.
Oh, yes.
At corner, who is starting right now.
Yeah, that was one more I hadn't gotten to. But yeah, so they're making additions all over their secondary and D line. And then beyond that, on offense, they're now starting 2nd-year, 3rd-round pick quarterback Desmond Ridder, as opposed to Mariota, who we spoke about before, was struggling a lot last year. And then they drafted Bijan Robinson, one of the best running back prospects of the last 20 years, with the 8th overall pick. So something there. So definitely a lot of changes to this team, a lot of reasons for optimism, and that kind of paid off a little bit in their first week where they beat the Panthers 24-10. Dad, you watched this game on the All-22, so do you want to talk a little bit about what you saw in this game from the Falcons specifically?
So I would say, despite winning the game by 14 points last week, in watching it, I felt like there wasn't that much separating the two teams on a play-to-play basis. The Panthers, I feel like they basically gifted the Falcons those 3 turnovers. I mean, so there were the 2 picks by Bates. Basically, he must have been invisible to the quarterback. He just threw it right to him.
Have you seen the next gen stats chart? They're literally stacked on each other. I thought he only threw 1 pick for a second because the red dots of where Bates picked him off are just right on top of each other.
Yeah, and he just was right there, and both of them thrown right to him. And so they kind of, I feel like it was like almost an unearned turnover for both of those. It wasn't really that they made a spectacular play. It just was a boneheaded play by the Panthers. And then Sanders fumbled the ball as he was going to the ground deep in Atlanta territory. So I think I feel this is more that the Panthers gave away the game than the Falcons took it, because the Panthers were able to move the ball, especially after they got in the first possession they moved down, but then they got stuffed on going forward on 4th, and then they had several kind of, you might say, were effective drives that were torpedoed by bad mistakes. So and so the points that Atlanta scored, a significant portion of them were because of the Panthers' mistakes that I felt like were unforced errors. So in watching most of the plays, I didn't see that much separating those two teams.
Interesting. How did you feel? Any other feeling on how Atlanta played either way, or do you want to move on to?
I will say that both Bijan and Algier looked good. Mm-hmm. So and they were gaining a lot of the yards on their own.
That the Bijan touchdown on
that's a sweet play.
Sweet play. That was sick.
I mean, it could have been a 5-yard loss or whatever, but he as soon as he gets me, jukes, moves, runs to a tackle, splits a double team, powers into the end zone.
Yeah, I mean, he's a freak.
It just shows. so much, elite movement skills with the ball in his hand.
I mean, there's a reason. There's a reason he was picked top 10. Like that, running backs never get picked top 10, and he did. There's a reason.
And I had a noted here. He said, I heard somebody say that he is the best running back prospect since Adrian Peterson.
It's up there. I mean, Peterson, Barkley, Elliott, and him, I think, are probably the 4 best of the last 15 years. And you could argue he's better than either Barkley or Elliott were. But moving on, Dad, so that's kind of what's been going on for the Falcons recently. So let's get into our other main segments for our game breakdowns. And we're going to start with, hey now, play nice, which is a section where we say some nice things about the opponent. Now, this was very hard for you last week, I'm sure, with the Bears. You were slandering them even in this section. And I
was talking up one part of the team by talking down another part of the team.
Yeah, no one. I was building some of the.
No one here. I was building up how good one part of their team was, but in order to do so, I had to shift the blame from that group to another so that.
Whatever helps you sleep at night. But I hope you have an easier time playing nice in this section. But, Dad, what are some things that you have to say nice about the Falcons? What are some compliments you can give them? They're a decent team. I think a lot of people had them in that driver's seat to win the NFC South. I know they were a trendy pick for, I think a lot of people call it the football hipster society, is what some people
I was picking the Falcons before anybody else was picking the Falcons.
Pretty much, yes. But what are some nice things
you know what I say about that? It's like picking a team in the NFC South doesn't matter.
We'll see.
None of them are good. I don't think any of them are good.
You're incurring this is the play nice section, and once again you are incapable.
I am
saying
slandering
nice things about our
all the other teams,
and they're not even a rival. This is not even a rival. I don't know why you feel the need to.
I'm slandering the hipsters
to burst these teams' bubbles. But anyway,
so here's what I'll say:
say some nice things about the Falcons.
I hadn't started yet. So their running game is elite. So they were 3rd by DVOA last year. Even without much, and that's being very efficient, not just volume, but efficiency, without the benefit of a passing game threat. That they're still able to move the ball very effectively in the run game without kind of loosening up the defense. And then they added Bijan Robinson to that run offense as well. After one game now this season, so they're second in rushing DVOA. And I think you mentioned last year their adjusted line yards were second.
Last year they were fifth, or something I believe, in the league. In adjusted line yards.
Last year by 5th. And this year, after one game, they're 8th. I mean, so not surprisingly, the running backs are also doing work. They're not just leaning on the offensive line. They're able to make plays on their own as well. And you could see it in that first game. Both Bijan and Algier are making plays with the ball in their hands. And as we mentioned before, Bijan looks like the real deal in one game. And I think you could see some of the plays he was making in preseason as well in training camp. But Algier is no slouch. He had 1,000 yards last year as a rookie.
I didn't realize that. I didn't realize that until I went back and looked. I was like, this guy had 1,000 yards.
I didn't get the chance to check it. He may have set the Falcons rookie record.
I'm not sure about that, but he had 1,000 yards on 5 yards.
I'm not sure of that either. I think I heard somebody say it, but I didn't get the chance to look at it. And I also, we were talking a little bit about how I didn't see. There was one thing I did see about the first game and the first possession when I mentioned Atlanta stuffed the Panthers on a 4th and 1 try. That defensive front for Atlanta on that play resets the line of scrimmage 2 yards into the Carolina backfield. They just totally take over and just maul them backwards. They had no chance. And I was like, I'd love to see the Packers do a play like that.
It's hopeful. But I do think, if we want to
well, it's hope for Atlanta.
That's true. But I was going to say, I hope that the Packers do that is what I meant. But I will say, in terms of what I have nice to say about Atlanta, is that their offensive line is also quite good, and that kind of ties into their run game. They have 3 first-round picks and another top 50 pick along the offensive line. So their left tackle, Jake Matthews, is a first-round pick. Their right guard, Chris Lindstrom's a first-round pick. Their right tackle, McGarry's a first-round pick. Their left guard, Bergeron's like the 38th overall pick, so like a very early second-rounder. And then their center, Dahlman's the only one that's like a later-round pick. So high draft capital. By PFF last year, they were first in run blocking and 8th in pass blocking. It's interesting to note that ESPN's metrics, like pass block win rate and run block win rate, have them much lower and closer to like middle of the pack. But we're saying nice things about them.
Even their run grade.
Yes,
that surprises me.
We're saying nice things about them. But so PFF had them very highly graded. Like we already said, they were 5th in adjusted line yards by DVOA. Which I think we've said like 3 or 4 times now, so we're going to try and stop saying it. But yes, so very good offensive line on paper. Very good offensive line last year. Very good both running and in pass protection, but specifically running. And then my other nice thing I had to say about the Falcons is they have a very nice group of skill position players. Now, whether or not they use them very much is a different question, but they have 3 top 10 picks at the skill positions. Kyle Pitts, tight end, was a 4th overall pick. Drake London, wide receiver, was the 8th overall pick. And now Bijan Robinson, running back, was the 8th overall pick. And that's essentially their last 3 first-round picks have all been on offense and all in the top 10.
So high first round picks used on offensive skill positions.
I know, right?
Wouldn't that be nice just once in a while?
Dare to dream. But I mean, I think Van Ness looked good in the first game is all I'm going to say.
He looked better than he'd look better than he was in training camp.
Yeah, I agree. But anyway, maybe that's just the Bears. But anyway,
this is kind of the question for the week. This is the question for the week. Are the Packers that good?
Or are the Bears that bad?
Or are the Bears that bad?
And this
That's the question that we won't know.
This is just the be nice section to Atlanta. We no longer have to be nice to the Bears. I mean, we can see.
We have some things about how good the Packers looked and how highly rated they were in Week 1. How much does it mean for the season?
You can't do
and
DVOA
also week
after
one. Week 1 is weird.
Yes, but you can't do DVOA after 1 week either. It doesn't work. The sample size is not big enough. But so
I think at least at Football Outsiders they used to do a modified DVOA for the first 5 weeks of the year, where they would carry over some of the information from the previous year. I think I have this vague recollection of reading something about how they did it for the first half of the year, where they're still using some of the information from the previous year. I don't know if that's still in the formula now or not.
But those are the nice things I had to say about Atlanta. Dad, anything else you wanted to add, or should we move on to our next section?
I guess, in talking about their skill position players, don't forget that Kyle Pitts just had a 1,000-yard receiving season as a tight end rookie just a couple of years ago. Something that, that's rare.
Very rare. And while he had a disappointing season last year, we'll see if he bounces back this year. And, we'll talk about it in a bit about whether or not they're actually going to throw the ball that much, that is. But let's move on to our next.
In terms of disappointing, some of it is just usage. I think it's disappointing to the fantasy community.
Yeah, this is not a fantasy
but he
podcast.
May have actually,
we're moving forward.
But I'm saying he may have actually been playing okay. They just weren't, giving him any opportunities.
But anyway, moving on to our next section, I'm nervous about. So this is kind of where we talk about how we think some of those advantages for the Falcons might cause problems for the Packers in this game. Dad, the first one I had, it's similar to last week, the run game, except it's even more so because the Falcons actually have a good offensive line and better running backs with Bijan and Algier. Now, you don't need to worry as much about quarterback running, but, Ritter is still an elite athlete in his own right, and I think not enough people talk about it. 9.54 relative athletic score with a 4.49 40 is nothing to sneeze at, and that's from Kentley Platt on Twitter. As we talked about last week, in 2022, Green Bay was 31st in rushing defense DVOA per FTN. And if Quay Walker can't play, will Isaiah McDuffie be able to hang in run defense? He is really small. And coming out of the draft, this is per mock draftable, he was 9th percentile in weight and 3rd percentile in arm length amongst all linebackers.
It's the arm length that's the big one.
It's
or
both.
The small one.
He's ninth percentile in weight too. Like he's tiny.
Ninth percentile in weight.
Very, very small. He's only 220 pounds, and he's probably put on
I thought
some
he was
weight.
More than that.
No, 225. He's probably put on some weight since then, but still pretty small. Will he just get swallowed up by the Falcons' offensive line? That's something to keep an eye on. And, the Falcons' run game is even better. And this is going to be another big test because was it just that the Bears' offensive line couldn't block anyone? Or is the Packers' run defense actually improved? Because the Packers actually had a pretty good showing in run defense, holding the Bears to under 4 yards a carry in the last game. But we're going to see if that was real or just noise. And then the other thing I'm keeping my eye on that I'm a little nervous about is Jesse Bates was able to kind of bait an inexperienced Bryce Young into two picks in the middle of the field. And we saw in that first game that at times, and in the preseason, at times, Love can get a little inaccurate in the middle of the field, and you just wonder if Bates will be able to do the same thing. So those are the two things I'm a little nervous about going into this game. Dad, what did you have?
Yeah, so basically it's actually maybe the same things where it's the run game, obviously. And then, Green Bay was dead last by DVOA in run defense last year, or in adjusted end.
No, that was
I guess adjusted line yards. Sorry,
they were
adjusted line yards.
Smacked.
They
backwards.
were second to the last, I think, in
last.
overall run.
Yeah,
but yeah, adjusted line yards, so they're dead last. And then week one they were eighth. So we'll see. Really hoping they made an improvement, but where does the truth lie? Was that the Bears, or are they actually better? They made a lot of changes up front in terms of who's getting snaps. So we'll see if they've actually improved. And then I think they're going to need to attack the middle of the field, something we talked about how they are attacking the middle of the field more this year than last year with Love throwing, but they have to be careful of turnover-worthy plays. And Love had at least one last week that wasn't caught by Chicago. There's one where he's a little off target to Dobbs, who deflects it. There's I heard comments that they thought it could have been intercepted by the Chicago safety if Dobbs didn't get a hand on it. And then I think he got dinged by PFF for what it seemed like the deep throw into double coverage to Reed. It was a little unclear which was the deep left throw that was deemed a turnover-worthy play. But considering that, I don't know if it's actually a skill on Bates' part to kind of hide in the defense and keep an eye on the quarterback so that he's it is something you could maybe be better at to be unnoticed when you were watching the quarterback's eyes or not. And and break on the ball.
He's a very good player. I mean, there's a reason they gave him 4 years, $64 million this offseason. They paid him a lot of money to come over. I've seen Cincinnati.
Some lists had him like a top 5 safety for this year.
Yeah, I'd consider him a top 5 safety.
5 to 10, I think, is what I saw. Between 5 and 10 is what I mostly saw. And so that's something that I think it's a little bit of a push-pull there. It's something we want to do, but we've got to be careful with the ball when we do it.
And
so that's something that's a little.
It's one of those things to me where
tension.
It's like, you bring me this team last year, and I'm like, my goodness, this is what an awful matchup for the Packers. And so if they play defense like they did last year, I'm going to be like, my goodness, what an awful matchup for the Packers. Because teams that could just run and sit on the ball were so not fun to play against as a Green Bay fan last year. And you hope, obviously, I don't want to extrapolate too much from week one, but if they play defense like they did in week one and the front gets after it like they did in week one, hopefully they'll be okay and it won't be that big of a deal, but it is something to be nervous about. But Dad, do you want to move on to...
Yeah, well, I would just say that one of the things we worried about last week is kind of problem is that could happen is will our opponent even need to bother to throw the ball? Does an elite pass rush, if we think we have one, but just as a thought exercise, even matter if the other team's not going to bother to pass? And Atlanta is a team that won't bother to pass.
Yeah,
I think.
And that actually kind of leads into my next point in our next section, which is exploitable weaknesses of the Falcons. They do not want to pass the ball at all. They do not seem to trust Desmond Ridder to throw the ball, at least through 1 week. And so as an exploitable weakness, my question is what happens if they fall in a hole early? So looking at his passing chart from last week on Next Gen Stats, he only had 4 attempts past 10 yards, which is less than Fields had last week even. He only had 1 past 20 yards. And 9 of his 15 completions, he went 15 of 18 on the day, so he didn't throw much at all. But 9 of his 15 completions were behind the line of scrimmage. So if you thought Fields wasn't throwing the ball downfield much last week, go watch that Falcons game because that man was not throwing the rock anywhere. That they didn't, and they pretty much took the ball out of his hands at one point. They were like, "All right, we're not gonna do this. We're just gonna run the ball. We're gonna throw screen passes to our running backs, and we'll be able to win the game that way." And so I think exploitability wise, if you can get them in a hole where they have to make Ritter throw, they still might not do it. They might just be like, I think we can come back and just keep running the ball. I think that's an Arthur Smith thing where like he would rather he's got a little bit of a Greg Roman in him where it's like I think he has active disdain for passing the football.
That's not real football.
Yeah, that's not real football. Give me 4 yards in a cloud of dirt. But yeah, so I think that's an exploitable weakness if they can get to a point where Ritter has to throw the ball because he did not show that he was ready for that, or at least the Falcons didn't show that they had any desire to have him do that through 1 week. And I think a lot of the optimism around the Falcons was like, there's no way Desmond Ritter can be as bad as Mariota was last year. And it's like, we'll see.
Yeah, I don't think that's off the table yet, as far as we can tell. We don't know. And maybe they're like trying to keep Desmond Ritter still like, in mint condition inside the box. We're not going to unpack him. So he's still got value because nobody actually knows how good he is because they're barely letting him play. I had kind of a similar thing. I think PFF had Fields with 4 yards, kind of whatever they call short and intermediate. Maybe not as far as what Ritter was actually throwing it. And when I watched the game, I was like, he only threw one like real pass he completed, and that was the one downfield to
Kyle Pitts.
That Pitts made a nice catch on. And otherwise, I was like, he's almost doing nothing in the passing game during the game. But in terms of my exploitable things, I say on the Packers defense, the Falcons O-line, at least in this game. So last year they were graded well, but this game they had the third worst adjusted sack rate.
Yeah, and that was something
by DVOA.
That was something you had not brought up. So they didn't drop back much in that game. They only dropped back like 24 times, I think, or something like that, and gave up like 4 sacks and 6 pressures and 24 pass blocking snaps, which is not great. And Brian Burns was eating their right tackle's lunch, you were telling me, which you didn't bring up.
He was just speeding past him. Well, I was playing nice earlier. We hadn't got to this part yet.
That wasn't the play nice section. That was before the play nice section.
I was saving it for this section.
Fair, but Brian Burns was eating their right tackle McGarry's lunch. McGarry was a good pass blocker last year, which was kind of surprising that he struggled so much this past week.
Yeah, so they got 25%. So I think, I think by PFF, the Carolina's pressure rate was 25%, while Green Bay's was 48% against the Bears.
You mean 25% allowed by Atlanta, and then Green Bay had
25%
allowed
by Carolina.
Yes, by Carolina. Thank you.
And Ritter is not going to be as hard to tackle as Fields. He might be athletic, but I was looking at their, his running numbers. Career 17 carries for 63 yards, and a career long of 16.
Yeah.
So it's nothing like Fields.
No, he's not nearly the runner that Fields is. He's very athletic on paper, but I don't think we've seen him put that to use yet in the NFL, I would say is the nice way of saying it.
And by PFF, Carolina was able to convert the 10 of those pressures into, 6 counted sacks. I don't think it's actually 6 plays with a sack because they had, PFF gives a whole sack to everybody who participates.
Yes. No half sacks, yeah.
I'd have to go back and parse it. I think it may have, I forget if it's 4 or 5 plays with a sack. Well, Green Bay only got 5 out of 36 pressures. So they had more trouble converting those pressures into sacks against Fields, which I think makes some sense, though. Fields does get sacked a lot. Though they had a little trouble tackling him. Though I don't think they had as much trouble tackling the other Bears last week. I thought besides Fields, their tackling was decent.
Their tackling was actually on paper not great, which I'll talk about in a later thing. That's something.
But I was wondering if that was just Fields.
We'll see. That's something that I think we need to keep an eye on. But I'll talk about that later because I ran some numbers on that. Anything else that
I have a couple other things. We talked a little bit about the passing in the middle, and even though Carolina gave up those 2 interceptions over the middle. They also were able to find open space, that they had receivers running free in the middle on a number of plays. And 98 of their 146 yards were over the middle. And Young was 11 of 14 over the middle. He only had one pass over the middle that hit the ground.
Yeah, that's a good point. Sounds good on paper. It sounds good when you say it like that. You should have saved that for the playing nice section. Although we're not playing Carolina, so fair enough. Maybe later this year you can say that.
And then the Falcons' defense last year, they're second worst against the pass.
Yeah. They were second worst against the pass, and we talked about this earlier. They were, let's see, fifth worst against the run. So they were bad on both sides of the ball.
Yeah, and after week 1, they're fourth best against the pass. That's what happens when you get, 2 picks and your opponent can barely pass the ball.
Yeah, it's crazy what going against a rookie quarterback in their first start will do. But they, like we were saying earlier, they made a lot of additions. So we'll see if those additions are for real.
So I was looking a little bit about that. So even after all those additions in the summer, their ranking as a defensive, as a secondary, was in the 20s by, like 23rd in PFF, 20th FTN Fantasy, a couple other sites I think I saw. I didn't go through them all, but they all seem to be in like the bottom third of the league as a secondary. And their corners, none of their corners last year had a good year. They're all below 60, below average. They added, I only looked at Trey Flowers, who started last week, and he's had a below coverage grade, below 60, so below average, for 5 of his 6 years. And Jeff Okudah, you also added, has been below 60 for all 3 of his years. I did look up IQs because he was off my radar.
They do still have Terrell, who I think is going to make life hard on, I would assume, Dobbs is probably who he's going to get matched up against. He's one of the better cover corners in the league, and I think that's going to be a tough matchup.
So those are things that I think are exploitable. Their secondary has been bad. They've made some additions. I think Bates is probably the big one that I think make the most difference. I'm not sure if the corners they've added are actually going to improve their secondary or not over last year.
And I think it's certainly something that to keep an eye on because, I think it all depends on if Bates can really bait them into throws in the middle of the field that are unwise. And then if Terrell shuts down Dobbs, then, we'll see who else they're going to choose to throw to. But Dad, do you want to move on to the next section or what do you have?
Yeah, we can go on to what we hope the Packers do.
Yeah, so our next section is what we hope the Packers do, which is kind of like how we hope the Packers approach this game in terms of taking advantage of weaknesses, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Dad, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, so as a defensive philosophy, I'd like to see the Packers stack the box and just play man downfield. I don't think they have... Ritter has not shown much ability yet in his career to complete much downfield and to really hurt you very often. And they don't have to worry about having their backs turned to him like they had last week for Fields. Though apparently they played a decent amount of man last week as well, despite that risk.
I saw the opposite. I saw that they were playing zone on like 96% of
was it that high? Well, I have to look. Yeah, somebody was saying that in terms of how they ranked in the league, not necessarily how many they did. So I didn't hear a percentage.
Because I had seen that the Packers actually played zone on what you would expect, like 95 or 90%, was what a podcast I was listening to was saying. Now I didn't actually check that for myself, and I probably should have. But that was what I had heard from that podcast.
But yes, what I'd say is they don't have. It doesn't come with as much risk this week against Ritter. He barely throws downfield. I would say actually similar to how often Fields is throwing downfield. He contrasts to Love, who threw like 11 downfield passes compared to only 4 for Ritter last week. So I think they just don't want him to do it. So I think he'll be less likely to take the chance when they're manning up on the receivers downfield. And then on offense, I'd like to see them involve like as many players, try to get crossers across the middle, but also it looked like Carolina had some difficulty on the outside, covering the outside of the field last year. But one thing I don't have those numbers at hand at the moment, but they basically were not good against any kind of receiver last year. They are 21st against wide receiver 1, 27th against wide receiver 2,
The Falcons
20th against the Falcons were. Mm-hmm. 20th against wide receiver 3, 23rd against tight ends, but 6th against receiving running backs. Is the one thing that they covered okay. And so I want to get like Dobbs, Reed, Watson, Musgrave.
Yeah, Hayden Hurst was cooking them last week a little bit.
And that was, then Hayden Hurst had a good game against them. And I was thinking, I think his catch distribution was pretty widespread. I think some on the outside, some on the inside. He was using a lot of the field. I don't know about downfield, but they were kind of spreading around.
And what that DVOA against, wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2, wide receiver 3, tight end, I think indicates to me more than anything is, and I want to verify this, but because I think AJ Terrell is one of the better corners in the league, it indicates to me that they're not really having him travel that much, I would imagine, and that it might be easier to get Dobbs off of him than, it would against other corners. And that's something I want to double check, and we'll tweet out at Father Son Packer. I think later when I go double check that. But that's something I want to keep an eye on is how much they actually have him travel, because it sounds like with those numbers that they don't have him travel much. For me, the things that I hope the Packers do is please, for the love of God, tackle well, because I could see a scenario where, the offensive line for the Falcons run blocks very well, gets the backs to the second level, and then, safeties have a hard time with them. So PFF last week had the Packers as just the 18th highest graded tackling team in the league. If PFF grades aren't your cup of tea, which I think is totally fair, sometimes they're kind of all over the place. They can be a little inconsistent. They're just another data point, in my opinion, but just another person's opinion on how the Packers played. But numbers-wise, last week the Packers had 10 missed tackles, over 50 tackles made, which would give them like a missed tackle rate. So like I just did missed tackles divided by number of tackles made, would have been 11th worst in the league last week. So that's something to keep an eye on. And then last week, Tyler Algier forced 5 missed tackles on 15 attempts. 5 missed tackles, was second in the league amongst all players.
Yeah, it looked like just a quick watch of the game. It looked like he was breaking tackles on just about every play. He had the ball in his hands. And
Bijan only had 1 forced missed tackle in that game. He had fewer touches, but I think
I would have given him 2 or 3 on that touchdown play
alone. That's what PFF had him marked as, but I think we all know what he's capable of if you've watched enough of him, and I would not count on him only having 1 in this game is all I'm going to say. And then the other thing...
Any particular reason why you think he might have more than 1 against the Packers?
Just a feeling, just a little inkling. But then the other thing is I would really like to see the Packers run at the edges in this game, specifically at Bud Dupree. Interior D-line for the Falcons is David Onyemata, Grady Jarrett, and Calais Campbell. Now, Onyemata and Grady Jarrett were both very good in run defense last week. They were 14th and 15th by PFF grade. Both did have kind of down years defending the run last year, but they've been both very good run defenders in previous years. So, they have that in them, and I think you could argue last year was just down years for them. And then Calais Campbell was 11th in run defense grade last year for PFF. So that interior trio has the ability to be a really good run-stopping group. And so I hope they run at the edges where Bud Dupree was 67th amongst all edges, just amongst edges in run defense grade amongst qualifying edges last year. Now, their other edge, Lorenzo Carter, was actually a pretty good run defender last year. I think he was like 40th, I remember looking up. But Dupree struggled last year defending the run. So that's something I would hope they would do. But yeah, so those are the 2 that I'm kind of taking a look at. Anything else you wanted to add there, Dad, that you hope that the Packers do? Or should we move on to our don't take your eye off that guy, which is almost our player of the game, but also more like players that need to play well also. It's kind of a little bit of both.
I generally have treated it more like a critical player in the game rather than somebody you expect to show out.
Yes. Well, do you want to take it away?
So my first one, and you kind of alluded to this earlier, is Quay Walker, if he plays. He's got the size and speed to make stops in the open field if he plays well. And he's been playing well so far. He's been looking a lot better this year compared to last year.
Can I call a quick timeout? You have 5 players listed here. I don't think that's fair if you're listing half the defense. Have you listed half the defense? Oh, wait, no. 2 of them are...
No,
still, you've listed 5 players, which feels like cheating if we're supposed to be watching 5 players. I get that one of them might not play, so you're down to 4, but you're treading on thin ice, buddy. Let's calm down here. But anyway, continue with Quay Walker.
Okay. Well, then I'll stick just to defense.
I mean, go through all of them. You wrote it out already.
Well,
I'm just giving you some crap.
In one, so my next one is in some ways one position, and that is the left pass rusher, the left edge, which seems to be usually Gary, sometimes Lucas Van Ness, but not always. But I think that spot, that's where Brian Burns was cooking the Falcons' offensive line, their right tackle.
Yeah, McGarry.
And he was just speed rushing past him. So that's where Gary rushes from a lot. And Lucas Van Ness has also been coming in from that side when he comes in a bunch. Yeah, maybe not every time.
My question is, was Brian Burns like feasting on him with speed rushes because he can't handle speed rushes, and will like the more power style of Gary and Lucas Van Ness yield less success, or is he just going to have a bad year this year, I guess, is the follow-up question.
It's an interesting point that whether he is maybe particularly susceptible to the style of edge that Burns is, who is mostly a speed rusher, as opposed to the power rusher that Gary and Van Ness seem to be. But I think it's something to watch. Is that what the rush that's coming in from that side? I think is something to keep an eye on, because it was really blowing up the Falcons' defense. The Falcons' offense last game.
Anyone else you wanted to mention there, or do you want me to throw mine in?
Why don't you throw yours in now?
Okay, well, mine to watch is Devondre Campbell, if Quay Walker can't go especially. Last week, I think something we forgot to talk about in the postgame for the Bears game was that Quay Walker had pretty much taken over as the single linebacker when they went to those like penny looks with just one linebacker on the field, which is very interesting because, 2 years ago, that was 100% Campbell's spot. Last year, that was Campbell's spot when he was healthy. It's something to keep an eye on there because, he played really well in that spot 2 years ago. And so they're going to need him to return to that form in this game because they're going to need him moving sideline to sideline against the running game of the Falcons, which is very multiple. And he's going to need to make tackles in space essentially quite a bit, especially if Quay Walker can't play.
He needs to get back to that almost no missed tackles for a whole season mode that he had 2 years ago.
Yeah, because and he's the one to watch because I think he's going to have to be pulling double duty because I think this is going to be a tough game for McDuffie if he has to play a lot. I know McDuffie's played really well in the preseason and in spot duty has looked like okay at times, like passable, like decent for a third linebacker. But, it's a very tough matchup, I think, for him. Just size-wise, it's going to be hard to get off the box. I wonder
if the matchup will change what alignments they use if Walker can't play.
I wonder if they just go to solely single linebacker. I wonder.
That's what I mean.
I don't even know.
Will they just do a lot of single linebacker with an extra D lineman or maybe a safety?
It's something to keep in mind. But that was my player to watch. Dad, let's move to overtime, which is kind of just where we talk about things we haven't gotten a chance to talk about yet. Do you want to go first?
Sure. So one thing we were talking about the Packers run defense. So they defended runs by running backs quite well last week. The Bears only had 19 carries for 63 yards, 3.3 per carry. So it was only the Fields runs where they kind of pushed it to a better performance. So can they continue that and show that they've really improved over last year? Some of their new, or players who are getting additional roles look like they've really improved the defensive front. Wyatt had a great game. Slayton, I think, was playing well against the run. The edges were being set well against the run. I think it was only when broken plays where Fields started scrambling around that they were actually able to gain yards. I don't think the designed runs for Fields were successful either. It was only as the play spread out and late in the play when he goes off script and runs downfield that
I think they
had success, and that
They only had like one designed run for Fields that I remember off the top of my head.
I remember one, and they got stuffed at the line.
Yeah, it was like a quarterback draw in the fourth quarter, and I was like, okay.
Yeah, exactly. This is exactly the play I'm remembering. And Ritter can't do that. At least they haven't wanted to even have him try, and he hasn't had big breakout of runs. And then the Atlanta corners we talked about there. I guess there's a little bit of speed there. Terrell is the fastest of the lot with a 4.42, though D. Alford is an unknown. Went to a smaller college, went out the combine, doesn't seem to have a pro day. I can't find a 40 time for him anywhere. There's some bigger corners. He's the smallest at 5'11", but Terrell is 6'1", Flowers 6'3", Okuda 6'1". None of them are fast enough to keep up with Watson if he can play.
Yeah, but they do all run 4.4s. They're not super slow.
They're not super slow. Okuda's the slowest at 4.48, though Alford's an unknown. But none of them are as fast as, at least what the Packers report read to be, or Watson.
Also, yes. But yeah, for me, the things that I wanted to talk about really quick in our overtime section, where we're just kind of throwing some stuff at the wall. Like you said, the young defensive line, I'm really interested to see if they've really made that step, specifically Wyatt, if he's really made that step or if it was just the Bears' offensive line was that bad. A lot. And so, because it would mean a lot to the Packers' defense if Wyatt made that step, because like I said previously, I was very worried about whether or not that pick was starting to look a little dicey. So that's something I'm keeping an eye on. And then the other one is first and second down execution. We talked about this in the postgame as a negative. They just faced way too many third and longs last week, and they need to stay ahead of the chains this week. Like we said last episode, they faced 16 third downs pre-Clifford time. They averaged 8 yards to go on third down. The league average last year was like 7, so a whole yard further. And then 6 of those 16 were 10-plus yards to go, and you just can't live like that. It's not sustainable. And then the last thing was penalties. Please do not have 9 penalties for 90 yards again.
Oh.
You can be chippy in a rivalry game. Don't be chippy every game. It's just like,
don't just give them a touchdown.
Yes.
By helping them march down the field.
Yeah, we talked about it in the last one, but they essentially gifted the Bears a touchdown just by committing penalty after penalty. They had them dead to rights like 4 times and let them back in the game, essentially.
And that's the other thing, is you can't give a decent team life when you have them down. This happens. You see this all the time, all across sports. You're winning. You're cruising along. You make a mistake. You give the other team some points, score, whatever, and all of a sudden they like Lazarus rising from the dead, and they come back against you.
Yeah.
When if you just played just a clean game for the rest, it would have been fine.
Yeah, exactly. And that kind of ends our overtime section, Dad. Let's move into wrapping this up here because we're going a little long. The bottom line. This is just kind of a fill in the blank, Dad. Bottom line, Falcons win if blank.
What I had was if Algier and Robinson are running wild in the Green Bay secondary, either by handoffs or passes. If they are spending time being tackled by our cornerbacks and safeties, that's not good.
And mine was the Falcons win if missing Aaron Jones totally tanks the Packers offense. Because I could see that happening, and that would just be...
That's something to worry about. The Packers just can't move the ball without Jones.
Yeah, and that's my Falcons win if. Dad, bottom line, Packers win if blank.
I say, if they can stop the run and just don't turn the ball over. They don't even, I think that's all they have to do in offense, is not turn the ball over.
And mine was the Packers win if they can jump out to an early lead and force the Falcons to pass to get back into the game. That was how I thought the Packers would win. Dad, score predictions. Mine is, kind of going under the assumption that Jones won't play. I got Falcons 20, Packers 17. I got a loss this weekend, unfortunately, on the road.
Apostasy.
I don't even know what that means.
It's sort of like a heretic.
Okay, fair enough. But anyway, go ahead.
I have the Packers winning 21-10.
Okay, I would take it. I hope you're right. I hope I'm wrong.
I think the Falcons' offense is actually not really that good. So I guess we'll see.
We'll see. But anyway, thank you so much for listening, everyone. This has been our pregame for the Falcons game this Sunday. Keep an eye on the clock. It'll be at 1 p.m. on Sunday, so go ahead and watch for that. We'll be doing a post game afterwards on Monday, so come listen to that. We'll be breaking down everything for the game, hopefully after a Packers win. If you like what you hear here today, come give us a follow on Twitter at FatherSonPacker. We tweet out when we have new episodes, articles we find interesting, video breakdowns that we find are really good, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So keep up with us there. And then subscribe to us on your podcast platform of choice, whether that's Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, et cetera, et cetera. We also put all of our episodes out on YouTube, so if you want to subscribe to us there, it would really help our numbers. Thank you so much again for listening, and until next time, go Pack Go.
Go Pack Go.